Yeah. Let's finish this shit before the next gathering, right? Oh my gosh. Okay, so we left off at chapter 24. This book smells like a rainstorm hit it. Where is the... 20. Yeah, it's got mold on this motherfucker. What's this page? 26. Sorry, not sorry. Huh. 25. That's interesting for sure. Oh, there you go. Ha. Sorry. Not sorry. Digger and Dragons, Chapter 24, ABARAT, or ABARAT, or ABARAT, or however it's pronounced. John Mischief hadn't been making an idle boast when he spoke of himself, or more correctly, of themselves, the brothers, as master criminals. During their long felonious career, they had stolen from all manners of places, coming away with all kinds of hauls. Only once had they been arrested and slipped custody while being transported back to the Yebidim Day by throwing themselves overboard. There were too many thefts for the brothers to remember every one, but there were some that they still liked to revisit in those idle moments of happy self-congratulation. Their burglary of the Chateau Malou Nice of Huffle's Hill, for instance, had been extremely profitable. They had come away with every costume Nice had ever worn to the cacodemonic carnivals on Soma Plume. 61 outfits, all set with precious jewels and sewn with threads of Cyrus. Just a year or so later, they had broken into the prison of Sorei and stolen all of the tattoos off the body of the gangster Mokai Mokai, leaving him as naked as the day he was born. Then there had been their picking of the locks of the door of the repository of remembrance that contained 131 rooms of treasures that had once belonged to the great and good of the ABARAT, going back to the time when the islands were 24 tribal territories. Nothing in the repository had been of real value. There had been no jewels, no precious metals, but the rooms had contained objects of infinitely more value than wealth. Here, collected and cataloged on the repository shelves, was a hoard of the heart, the nursery toys of kings, the playthings of princes, the mud pies that the Potenese had dreamed would one day be palaces. The potential purchasers of all these objects of lovely inconsequence were the people across the archipelago who had idolized their one-time owners, and the brothers had anticipating making so many millions of them they would never have to steal another fork. But it was not to be. Mokai Mokai had broken out of the prison 2 days later, had come after the brothers, and the only way Mischief and his siblings had escaped with their lives was by handing over their booty from the repository to him. But the treasure the brothers had been most proud of stealing, because stealing it had proved so difficult, was a painting known as the Beautiful Moment. It hung in what was known as the Stone House, the possession of the sometime lord of the islands of the day, King Klaus. Since the death of his daughter, Klaus had become an obsessive eater and weighed over 1,000 pounds. He ate and slept in a vast clockwork car and had chastened the thieves in it when he had awoken to find his painting had been stolen. That had been a close call, but the brothers had been proud of the drop, and indeed so enamored of what they had stolen that they had almost considered keeping it. The beautiful moment was a lovely thing, or more correctly, three things. For the artist, a man called Thaddeus George, had painted a triptych that, when laid side by side, portrayed the entire archipelago immortalized in oils at the time when everyone had had high hopes for the future. I think this is Thaddeus George. Check it out. This artwork is fucking cool. And then here's some paintbrushes. Paintbrushes, yeah. Okay. But here's I think the painting. The archipelago of all the islands. Ready? I gotta move my coffee. It's gonna be shit. And the book is, check it out. So this is what they were so proud of stealing. King Claus had commissioned the work from Thaddeus 6 weeks before his daughter's wedding, taking him up in the air balloon so that he might see the ABARAT spread out at this beautiful moment. The world Thaddeus had painted was very different from the ABARAT of today. The islands had been very different 16 years ago. There had been no Comexo City or Payan. Babylonium had been the modest little collection of tents and fun-fair entertainments, a Ferris wheel, a hall of mirrors, a geek in a cage. The air traffic above the islands had been little more than a few million birds and the odd balloon, and the sea traffic had consisted chiefly of sailing ships. In the interest of his art, Thaddeus had also taken some liberties with the size and complexity of the islands. He had left out most of the towns and villages, and the smaller outcroppings, which did not count the hours like Vesper's Rock, had also been omitted. But even in this much simplified form, Thaddeus's last known work had been his most ambitious achievement. To look at it was to feel as though you were a bird hovering over the islands, borne aloft by balmy wind. The Johns had made a small fortune from that theft. They had sold the picture to Rojo Pixler, and he paid many thousands of them, which Mischief assumed he had borrowed, for at the time Pixler had still been a traveling salesman, selling gaudily painted wind-up toys for children. The fact that Pixler had probably used the beautiful moment as a way to plan his slow but apparently irrevocable irrevocable takeover of the islands was not lost on the brothers. In the years since Pixler had bought the painting, Pixler's judgment and his luck had been flawless. He was now undoubtedly the most powerful non-magical creature on the ABARAT. Besides Comexo City, which was so vast it was practically a world unto itself, the sometime salesman also owned a controlling share of Babylonium, and was now planning the construction of a pleasure dome, as he described it, at 5 o'clock in the evening. There was talk even of his buying the great ziggurat at Soma Plume and deconsecrating it, then turning it into a second city the size of Comexo. Despite the fact that his public face was the ever-smiling Comexo kid, Pixler was by no means a sweetheart. Indeed, he had made it known that when he purchased the painting, that if John Mischief or any of the brothers ever whispered to anyone that the transaction had taken place, he would arrange for a whisperer and his brothers to be silenced. That was the real Rojo Pixler speaking. So Mischief and his brothers had kept their mouths shut, and the fact that the painting had gone missing didn't even make it into the news sheets. Still, there were plenty of other crimes for which Johns were responsible, which continued to be the talk of the coffee house and mother cake stalls alike, years after they had taken place. It was widely thought that when Mischief and his brothers were finally tracked down and brought to trial, the punishment would be death. Here, let's check out some more art. Some creepy shit. All of which goes to explain why Mischief, exhausted by his travels, thought he was and badly wanted to stay close to Candy so that as to retrieve the key she still carried, did not dare remain near the Yevadim Day. Rather than enter the great head in pursuit of Candy and risk being recognized inside, he waited instead in the water close to the jetty until all the drama there was over, and then dragged himself back onto the quay, or what was left of it, in hope of finding a boat that would carry him away to a less busy island. Somewhere the brothers could relax for a few days and plan their next move. He was in luck. He was sitting feeding flakes of buttered coalfish to slop when he heard a woman clap her hands to get the attention of all who were on the dock and announce that, "We need someone who can dig." With one voice, his brothers all said, "He can dig." And not for the first time, Mischief found himself volunteered. 5 minutes later, a 2-masted sailing ship called Bello left the Yevadim Day and headed into the currents of the Straits at dusk. The man in charge of the vessel was one of Captain Hemet McBean, a bear of a man who had sea salt in his blood. There were 4 other occupants of the Babello, besides the 8 brothers. First, there was a person who called for the digger, a woman warrior by the name of Geneva Peachtree, who was obviously in charge of this mission, whatever its purpose. Beside her, the captain. There were 2 other diggers, one creature who hailed from the island of Spake, called Two-Toed Tom, and the other a large, brutish fellow, bald, but 3 black curls, called Kiss Curl Carlotti. He had been a gambler of some notoriety, but had lost his tongue and his middle toes in a bet many years before, and had sworn off gambling thereafter. The last member of this unlikely band, but by no means the least important, was a waif-like girl, no more than 13, with long white blonde hair and dark, eloquent eyes. Her name was Tria, and she sat at the bow of the Babello most of the time, staring out over the waters of the Isabella. Those waters soon became very much more turbulent as McBean's little vessel left the straits and headed out onto the open sea. There were thunderheads moving down from the heights of Hap's vault, and Hemet had already warned his passengers that the storm was going to be ferocious. The clouds were now moving over the sea, spitting lightning down at the seething water. The girl, Tria, seemed completely unperturbed by the way that the Babello rode and the increasingly violent waves. She simply gazed out toward the darkened islands ahead, and now and then whispered something to Geneva. The girl's instructions were to turn past to McBean, who was piloting the vessel in whatever direction Tria's instinct indicated. As they traveled, Two-Toed Tom, who boasted a fine array of spiral tattoos, sat on the starboard side of the boat, with a yellowed and much folded map in his hands, studying its contents with a large magnifying glass. Geneva Peachtree stood in the center of the boat, occasionally giving orders, but most of the time scanning the horizon. Now and again she would go over and consult the map with Two-Toed Tom. The Johns were far too curious not to wander across and ask what's so interesting about the document that they were studying. As soon as they approached, Two-Toed Tom hurriedly began to fold the map up. Then Geneva said, "It's all right, Tom. I know the brothers." "You do?" said John Plunkett. "By reputation only," Geneva Peachtree replied, with a smile so lovely that the Johns all fell a little in love at the same moment. "Then if you know us," said John Moot, "you probably don't trust us." "No, Quite the reverse, Geneva said to Moot. The only people I really trust are those who have nothing to lose. Ah, said John Plunkett, that's us. Nowhere left to run, said Follett, rather wearily. Here's my promise to you, brothers, Geneva said. If things go well in this expedition, I will give you a home where I promise you a law will never touch you. A place where you can start a new life. Where's that? On the Isle of the Black Egg, Geneva replied. It may not look like the most inviting of places. 4 a.m. is a dark time. The moon's gone down and the sun's nowhere near showing its face. But there's more to my island than darkness and death. Really? Believe me, sometimes when life looks to be at its grimmest, there's a light hidden at the heart of the things. Oh, we should show her. Look at this. Oh, fucking cool. There's a light hidden in the heart of the things. She looked away as she spoke, and John Mischief knew that she wasn't just describing the mysteries of her island. She was talking about the here and now, this voyage and its purpose. This seemed as good time as any to ask exactly what purpose was. What have you got planned for us? John Follett asked. Why do you need a digger? For one thing? Tell them, Tom, Geneva said. Two-Toed Tom looked a little reluctant. Go on, Geneva urged. I don't want to frighten them off, Tom said. I don't think John Mischief is the nervous kind somehow, Geneva replied, nor are his brothers. If you say so. I say so, Geneva replied. Her words, however gently delivered, were indisputably in order, and have given it. She left Tom and the Johns to talk, and went to consult with Tria again. The Johns watched her go. It happened quickly, huh? Two-Toed Tom said. What? Falling in love with Geneva? One look, really. That's all it takes. The Johns all looked back at Tom. Sallow, Drowse, Plunkett were blushing. Don't worry. She has the same effect upon everybody. Even me. Do you have a lady? No, said Mischief. You? I have a strange household, Two-Toed Tom said. Do you want to see? Please, said Mischief. Two-Toed Tom took out a much-thumbed photograph of 5 individuals. One was Tom himself, with a 2-headed Egyptian Jenga curled up at his feet. Beside Tom stood a big scarlet-skinned man with long braided hair, who had a miniature blossom pig in his arms. I see what you mean, Mischief said. A strange household indeed. Do you miss them? Of course, all of them. We've been together for a long time, but this mission is important to me. They understand that I had to come. He very carefully put away the pictures, and they know I might not come back. What did he say? John Plunkett asked. I heard what he said, John Drowse replied. The whole horn of the Drowse leaned forward as he addressed Tom. Let me get this straight, John Drowse said. Are you saying we could get killed? Oh, hush, all of you, John Mischief said, embarrassed by his brother's show of cowardice. We signed up for this trip, and we're going to see it through to the bitter end. It would be nice to know exactly what all of this is about, however, Sallow said with his unusual aplomb. You know, just so that we can be prepared. Of course, said Tom. His earlier reserve now set aside. Where do I begin? Well, let me start with Finnegan. Do any of you remember a man called Finnegan Hobb? Of course, said John Slop. He was the poor fellow who was going to marry Princess Boa, said John Moot, but didn't get the chance, said John Sallow, because the princess, said John Mischief, was taken by a dragon at the altar. You have it right, said Tom. Finnegan was a fine man indeed. I believe he would have been a great man if he'd married the princess and had a chance to come to power. Together they would have healed a lot of old wounds around the islands, feuds that go back to the war between night and day. He was not of royal blood, was he? Said John Serpent. Well, that's an interesting thing about Finnegan, Tom went on. His father was the Prince of Day. His name was Maffick Hobb. His mother was of lowly birth, but had some extraordinary powers of her own, and she was a child of the night. Her name was Maria Capella, and she lived on the Speckled Frew. Interesting mix, Mischief observed. Finnegan was quite a hybrid. That's an understatement, said Tom. It was a forbidden union. This marriage between Maffick and Maria, a prince of day and a witch from the night side, it was unheard of. So Finnegan was a rare man in every way. I had the honor of knowing him for a few months during his courtship with Princess Boa. I was in charge of her stables, and I would arrange for them to go out riding together. It was a secret courtship at first, of course, but it didn't stay secret for very long. Well, why not? Because the love she felt for him poured out of her. Love that deep couldn't be hidden, not from people who knew her very well, like her father. He soon saw through her little arrangements. And what did King Claus say when he found out? John Moot asked. At first he was enraged about it. How could the princess contemplate falling in love with a man of such questionable birth? Half this, half that, I remember him saying. But that all changed very quickly. Well, why? Because he met Finnegan. Tom made a small, sad smile. You couldn't know Finnegan more than 2 minutes and not see how good a man he is. How gentle, how compassionate, how certain in his opinions and so profound in his feelings. He sighed heavily. These memories were obviously bittersweet. So anyway, King Claus sanctioned the union and a wedding was announced. It was to be held on the Nonce in the old palace of Bowers. Believe me, there was never a woman so happy as the princess in those months leading up to the ceremony. Her love for Finnegan illuminated everything she said and did. Tears welled in Tom's eyes and ran down his cheeks. I have one consolation, he said, his voice raw with sorrow, that she is the happiest soul in creation until the last moment in her life. So you were there in the palace when it happened? Sallow asked. Oh, yes, said Tom. I'm afraid I was. I was standing perhaps 10 yards away from her when the dragon's tongue took her. He fell silent, as a picture of this horror entered his mind's eye. It dragged her out throughout the palace door before we even knew what was happening. Finnegan was on the first to go after her, but he was too late, and she was dead by the time he got outside. 10, 12 seconds maybe, from standing at the altar with Finnegan at her side, to lying out in the dirt, gone from us. Even now I think of it, after all those years, I scarcely seemed believable. A great roll of thunder shook the board of the boat, and the first drops of icy rain started to splatter against their faces, mingling with the tears on Tom's face. What's all this got to do with this little fishing trip we're on? John Mischief said. I'll tell you. For 9 years after he lost Princess, Finnegan went looking for the family of the dragon that killed her. He needed answers, you see. He knew the murder of his beloved hadn't been the actions of a rogue worm. Worm, said John Serpent. Yes, sir, worm, Tom replied with deep contempt. Dragon is too notable for a term of these things. Wait, said Mischief. I don't think I quite follow this. Are you saying Finnegan was going after these dragons, these worms, to interrogate them? Wait, said Mischief. I don't think I'm quite following this. Oh yeah, I'm repeating it. Thanks for the reminder. Worms have tongues, Tom said, and many of them are very eloquent. A few are poets. You're a poet. You should eat your pig's ear and not yell at me while I read. Really? Said John Swallow. I've never knew that. Any of it any good? Said John Moot. Ordure, muck, excreta, Tom replied. Just wondering, said Moot. So Finnegan assembled a band of folks who were ready to help him find these worms, Tom said. There were 11 of us back then, 12 including Finnegan. McBean, Kiss Curl, Geneva, and myself are all that I know of for sure that are left of the band. Lordy, said Slop. Dragon hunting isn't a job for the people who aren't interested in living long lives. I assume Finnegan had already killed the dragon that murdered his beloved. Oh yes, Finnegan killed it right outside the palace, climbed into its mouth, struck the sword blow into its brain, and it was famous worm too. Perhaps you heard of it. Gravina pravnine. That's impressive, said Mischief. They're entirely ridiculous creatures when you have them cornered, Two-Toed Tom said. All that din and self-importance, and they have not a breath of love or honor in them. But intelligent, said John Pluckett. Oh, certainly. Marvelously intelligent, some of them. But intelligence without love is an empty thing, I think. Well said, John Sallow remarked. Believe me, I've been nose to nose with several worms in my time, and they're all vicious, vain, and cruel species. Even the crowned heads. You mean royalty? Oh, yes. Gravinia Prevenone was fourth in line to the scaly throne. Only his brothers and his sister were before him, and all still alive, I'm afraid to say. What of Finnegan? Said John Moot. You were telling us about him and you got lost with all this wormy talk. Ah, yes, Finnegan. That's where she comes in, Tom said. He pointed to the small girl still sitting on the bowl of Bellabello, braving the waves. Geneva had put a coat around Shriya's frail shoulders, but she seemed not to notice the downpour. Our little friend Shriya has an uncanny ability to find people, often people who have been missing a long time. And when did you last see Finnegan? Mischief asked. About 6 years ago, Tom replied. He went off on his own. Why? Because his quest for the family of Gravenina Pavonine had taken such a terrible toll of lives. He didn't want anybody else to die on his account. So he slipped away while we were on Ifrit, leaving a note saying we should all get on and live our lives. Forget about him, he said, as if we could ever do that. He glanced up at Geneva at that moment, happened to be looking in his direction. She clearly knew by the expression on his face with the tale that he was telling, and with the little nod of the head of encouragement to finish it. So Tom went on. We all tried to obey his instructions, for his sake, as much as for our own. We went our own separate ways and tried to live our lives, but Finnegan was never very far from our thoughts. How could he be? We had shared his quest and his company for years. We all knew he was out there somewhere among the islands alone. Tom shook his head. We hated to think of that. We listened for news of him, and sometimes we heard of something. He had been seen here, he'd been seen there, but never anything certain. And then about 7 weeks ago, Geneva met Shriya, and apparently the child knew immediately that there was somebody Geneva wished to find. So she knows Finnegan's alive. So she says. For certain? For certain. But she has a sense that whatever he is, or wherever he is, he's buried. Aha, said Mischief. So that's why you need a digger. You won't be alone, believe me, said Geneva, breaking into this conversation. We'll all be digging beside you. I'm glad to hear that, said Mischief. Geneva turned to Tom. Will you try and persuade Shriya to go below for a while? Maybe she'll listen to you, at least until this storm is. She was interrupted by the sound of something grating along the underside of the Bellello. The vessel shook. We have hit something, John Serpent said in alarm. I knew we shouldn't have come on this trip, John Pluckett muttered. Crazy. Mischief ignored his brothers and peered over the side of the boat. to see if they had struck a rock. But no, that's not what had struck, or rather had struck them. It was moving through the crashing waters, and it was no small object. Tom looked up at Mischief, an expression of profound concern on his face. I think we found our first dragon, he said. And that completes chapter 24. Next chapter, 25, Mischief Undone. Whoop whoop. Have a good evening.